5, and welcome back to the people that tune in every now and then to listen to what I have to say. I have a little bit of social commentary today. I want to draw a parallel between the invasion that happened to Ireland in the year 1169 and the invasion that is undergoing in Ireland even as we speak, which, in my opinion, is a lot worse than the initial invasion. Indeed, it took a long time to regain ourselves after the initial invasion. Recently, I dropped into the library and I picked up a fantastic little book here, as you can see. It is called Ireland, written by a French fellow called Gustave de Beaumont. And he wrote this book in the year 1837, believe it or not. This fellow, anyway, Beaumont, is a good friend of a more famous fellow called Alexis de Tocqueville, who wrote a very famous book called Democracy in the United States, where he went and he toured the United States in the 1800s, and he wrote a very good social history. And it's a work that's praised high and low. This other French fellow, his friend Beaumont, he's not so very well known. I had never heard of him. But anyway, he wrote a very similar book. He went to Ireland and he did a history of the social situation. And now I'm going to be reading this book. He lays out a bit of background to the story, telling about the situation that led to the initial invasion of Ireland in the year 1169. It begins with the fact that there was an English man who became Pope, and his name is Adrian IV. He will issue what's known as a papal bull, which is a papal edict or command or whatever. It's called papal bull, and the year is 1156. And what it says is that Ireland should be under the jurisdiction and the control of King Henry II of England. Well, that was all well and good, because it didn't really mean much, because King Henry II is over in England and the Irish are chilling out themselves over in Ireland, and it was okay. But needless to say, things changed a bit. In coming up to the year 1169, we had a king of Leinster. His name was Dermot. We know him as Diarmaid MacMorcha. Anyway, or MacMorad, depending on which pronunciation you use. This fellow, Dermot or Diarmaid, he actually took the wife of the king of Meath. That fellow's name is O'Rourke. Okay? Needless to say, O'Rourke, instead of being happy or whatever, he got very upset with the situation. It's not to be made a joke of course, but these things happened in Ireland back in the good old days. Now he is unhappy, so he will go to the High King. His name is O'Connor, with his grievance. Now it just so happened that the Dermot fellow supported the O'Neills, so O'Connor, of course, sees a method of giving this Dermot fellow a good slap, which he does, and he sort of chases him out of the kingdom, and that's well and good as well. But he does not take this defeat lying down. He goes over to England and he pleads for support, and needless to say, King Henry II, well, he now sees an opportunity to make use of this papal bull and have it to his advantage. So he allowed a Norman knight by the name of Fitzwilliam, we call it that guy Strongbow, to come back to Ireland with Diarmaid MacMorcha and invade Ireland, etc. Dermot wanted to get his kingdom back. It's as simple as that. Now, when it became apparent to Dermot that he ain't going to get no kingdom back because there's new guys in town, he's unhappy and he realizes he made a little bit of a mistake. So he will ask these Normans to return home. Well, they're not going anyplace because they have actually burned their boats that brought them over. So the possibility of them returning was slim and none, just like our present day people that are coming into Ireland. The probability of those guys returning is slim or none as well. And I am betting heavily on the none at the moment. So when he asked them to go home, Fitzwilliam, that is Strongbow, he said these famous words: "We have imperiled our lives in fight, and come what may, we are destined to live and die with you," which means to say, you're in it to win it. And that was that. Now, the Irish put up a good struggle back and forth, and they weren't finally defeated, as we know, till 1603 at the at the Battle of Kinsale, and after that, the conquest, you could say, was basically complete. Now, this fellow, Gustave de Beaumont, he will set out the parameters which made it somewhat easier than it might have appeared for the invaders to succeed. And the problem the Irish had is exactly the same as we have today, because it's always the same problem. First problem they had was they were seriously fractured. There was no real high king as such. There was five provinces, each with their own king. And one of those five would be chosen to be the orderly or the high king, but he didn't have too much power. They were all more or less equal, so it was more or less nominal. Even the kings of the provinces, they had sub kings under them, and they weren't more or less too much powerful over them either. Those sub kings did exactly what they wanted to do when it suited them, and they'd have their own squabbles. Now, each of these little sub kings, like the O'Kellys of Emania or the O'Briens or the whoever, they all will be consisting of clans and families who may or may not be too amenable to do what their lord tells them as well. So the bottom line is the Irish were exceedingly weak. They were really a paper tiger. At some stage of this game, they were so weak that the King of the Isle of Man was contemplating invading Ireland to conquer the whole kit kat and caboodle. But that didn't happen anyway. But it almost did. That was their first problem, and that is exactly, of course, the problem we are seeing today. Nobody can get along. Everybody wants to be a little king, becoming a big king, and becoming the orderly and becoming king of the hill. And we are going to get no place for as long as that situation remains. It's as simple as that. Now, there's also an element with Irish psyche of begrudgery and too good for him and serves him right, etc. It just so happened that these fellows under Strongbow landed in Dublin, which, as we know, was part of the early Danish or Norse settlements. Now, the Norse were defeated in 1014. That's 160 years before that. In the intervening years, they would have married into the Irish and more or less became somewhat Irish. But be that as it may, the Gaelic Irish still held a little bit of a grudge against them. So they were somewhat happy enough to see these guys getting a little bit of a hammering, even though they could also see that the greater danger was the Normans coming in. And sure enough, we're seeing the exact same thing today, with the fact that there's loyalists up in Northern Ireland and there's nationalists down in the south, and both sides wouldn't care too much if the other side got a good hammering because they don't like them. Even though they can see the much greater danger, it still is part of their psyche just to let them be taken care of. Now, the bigger thing that led to the domination and the uh, advantage of these Normans coming in was this papal bull. The church at that time was very, very powerful, and they decided who was kings and who was princes and who was going to be not. Their word was law, it was divine guidance, and everybody did what the church priests, etc., would tell them to do. It's as simple as that. So you ask yourself, is there an outside influence in Ireland today which dominates and domineers as well this sort of public perception of reality? And sure enough, there is. It's called the EU. It is taken for granted by a great many of Irish people that what they say is absolute gospel, no different whatsoever than what the Catholic Roman Church was telling those Irish at that time, and they believed it. For example, they will say, "Oh my goodness, we have to take these migrants in because under the EU directive and the under the UN directive and under this, that, and the other, it's under anything at all but their own directive, and that is that." Likewise, with the payment of them, well, we are obliged to pay them under this, that, and the other. You will also see coming up now shortly, there is a proposal to raise 800 billion euros from the EU. That translates to That translates to about 8 to 9 billion euros per capita if it was prorated for the Irish people. But unfortunately for the poor Irish people, it's not going to be prorated because Ireland likes to consider themselves the richest country in the world. So you don't expect the Irish to be paying the same amount as a very poor country with, say, Romania or whatever. So the bill for the Irish will be somewhat like $30 billion. On top of that, there's another $20 billion coming down the pike for global warming. So Ireland is going to get completely smothered. But it is that dominating force that they cannot seem to just throw off. It's like the church. They are viewing the EU as if they're in somewhat of a cult. Now, that is the situation in Ireland indeed. And it'll give an excuse back in 1169 that Henry is going to come over here. All he wanted was to be proclaimed the lordship and to retain the lordship of Ireland. He was going to leave the people in their lands, their properties, their laws, their customs, their this, that, and the other. The only thing that he was concerned about was the moral good and the promotion of the true Christian faith at the time. That is what's known as just getting your nose in under the tent. Needless to say, started off small and it ended up being a complete disaster. Now, could one not say to themselves that as regards immigration into Ireland, that it indeed started off small and it was proclaimed to be of the best intentions? It was Polish people coming in or wherever from Eastern Europe. These people are really economically disadvantaged. And is it not our duty to help them out? And they were accepted and they were okay. But the, as I said, the tent has been lifted up, and that quickly led to other people coming in. And now, of course, we have the result that everybody and their grandmother is coming in. And this situation in Ireland is getting worse by the day. The people are getting more awakened, but I believe a lot of them were already awakened, but they didn't have the courage of their convictions to stand out and say, I am now going out onto the street. We'll say there was a march down there in Sligo there this past weekend, supposedly 500 people. It turned out all local people, which I believe all marches should be local, and that's a talk for another day. But it did show that people now are losing their fear of being cancelled, name called, or ridiculed, and that is a very happy development indeed. But on reading this book, and I'm only after beginning it now, and I'm greatly looking forward to reading the rest of it, I was absolutely amazed at the parallels between 1169 and the beginning of the 21st century. All right, thank you for watching. That's just a little bit of commentary and a little bit of history rolled into one.